Latimer, Senator, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago, a nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together, understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the vice president said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit, because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working-class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me, and she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you. Let's turn now to Hurricane Helene. The storm could become one of the deadliest on record. More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing. Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger, stronger, and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today, actually, a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then, of course, afterwards, to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job. And I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane. And my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover. But we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. And I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years.
Senator.
Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing
Senator,
worse by the climate.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil. But the folks know, and like I said again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our number one export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. and thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign, and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that, and an all-above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters. Senator Vance, your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Governor, do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things, regarding children?
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history, 30% decrease in Ohio. But there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the attorney general of the largest state and a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this, and that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents, detection for drugs, DOJ money to speed up these the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him to, what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again, 9 years after he came down that escalator, dehumanizing people and telling him what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as drug mules. And it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary. But the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this. And Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true. Don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Langford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim, Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our border czar, Kamala Harris, has been, and it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed. You have got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it, and it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn now to the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora.
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan, so let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by 1/3. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do, we'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best, more people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer, a lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do. And some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies, and what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%, open the American southern border, and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now, not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom, because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say, look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle-class and working-class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one, whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, or whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years, and the last year as president? That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop, and we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics show that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on health care then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now, look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything. Many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this is I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate Donald Trump unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate. and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out to messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now to the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says. But look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about health care. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in health care for a reason. We trust women. We trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Yeah, well, the question got asked and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography? There's a very real chance had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, you know, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that, too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator?
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their health care decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget, Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
Well, that was very interesting. Sorry if you guys didn't hear me before at the start, but last night there was a barrage of rockets sent from Iran into Israel in response to the attacks that Israel did on Lebanon. And that has had a bit of an impact on some of the questions starting off the debate, which you would have started off by seeing. But I want to do my intro again. This is maybe the last debate. There may not be another presidential debate at the end of this month ahead of the election between Trump and Kamala Harris. But I've been having a good laugh with my friend Shakeel Latimer, who a familiar face to you guys now after the last couple episodes. Surprising, like a couple of people have recognized you on the street just from a couple episodes, which is kind of a good thing. But what's your immediate reaction to this before they come back?
I'm glad that our viewers didn't actually hear what we said at the beginning, because I said the rules are that the moderators won't be doing any fact checks, and there's going to be 2 breaks. So I guess I'm wrong about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very, very biased, and I think CBS have let themselves down by doing that. It's very, very transparent. People can see that.
Yeah.
And this is, forget about how you feel about this election or any other election. The media does itself no favours by behaving in this way, because it means that people have less trust and less faith in them. And we rely on the media. We want media to tell us when, a company's not acting appropriately or when government's out of control. So, this is very, very poor. I've got to say, I'm very interested to hear J.D. Vance keep saying, I came from a middle-class family, I came from a working-class family. I think he only needed to say it once or twice to counter Kamala Harris. I don't think he needs to say it as many times as he has been.
As she does as well.
But but Walz, I don't think Walz is doing very well at all, to be honest with you. he doesn't look very comfortable. I could forgive the first few minutes for being a little bit nervous, perhaps, but I don't think, his answers are not great. And he's called himself a knucklehead. Oh,
I'm a bit of a knucklehead sometimes.
Yeah,
okay.
Fair enough, but I mean, Republicans are going to run that in a campaign ad, right?
They are.
So, poor choice of words, and also just tried to sidestep the issue. I got a little bit caught up in the rhetoric. How do you get caught up in the rhetoric? That's like me saying, I was there for September 11. I was in New York. I wasn't, because everyone knows that I was in Sydney, and I didn't go to New York until I didn't go to America until I was in my 30s.
Yeah.
But no, I was there, and I just got caught up in the rhetoric. I mean,
It was 2 minutes. They gave him 2 minutes to clear it up, and then to my shock, they actually held his feet to the fire. And they said, but hang on a sec, to clarify, you actually weren't there, right? And he's like, no, and then it's very clear straight away, and he looks embarrassed immediately.
Yeah.
But
he's got that sort of frown the whole way through as well. He's looking, put against JD Vance. I think JD Vance looks a little bit more polished. He's young too. I mean, he's my age, JD Vance. So I think he's too young, but that's besides the point. I think he's outplayed.
Do you think that's why he has a beard? Because he's the only one out of this race. Obviously Kamala doesn't have a beard, but do you think that he deliberately goes out of his way to actually put a beard on so his lack of experience might not be in question at all?
Look, I'm not sure. I couldn't answer that. Mind you, I don't know. I've got a goatee, and I don't think that adds to my experience.
But you don't need it. He's running against he's got Trump, he's got Kamala Harris. There was plenty of good options that were older than him.
What do we think if Trump was to grow a beard or
he doesn't need it.
Moustache?
He's old enough.
Well,
if anything, literally, Walz and Trump don't want to be seen as older. They want to be seen as younger. They'll always be clean shaven. Others just this grey beard. I think Trump should rock one, but I'm crazy. Guys, I think they're coming back now.
Those Hulk Hogan, moustaches on Trump or something.
Yeah. Here you go, guys. We're just coming back now.
Welcome back to the CBS News vice presidential debate. We want to turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children and teens in America is by firearms. Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartel. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, and here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that worked. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting, and I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said, actually, about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly, weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse, or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is, talking about cities and where it's at, the number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues, making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns, and there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. Let's turn now to the top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. We have, first, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, It can be shifted. It can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the Vice President is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back, and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens if you lower energy prices? As Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal immigration, is, think about it. If a truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods, too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer?
Can I have it?
Where, Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But, Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in.
Well, of course, that's not true. And again, you have the facts. I guess we agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That, look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's, again, blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask, though, on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor, your time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. Look, it's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. Think about healthcare. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice and will also drive down costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think this is an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done. But when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and health care costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better health care policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to. Go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened, and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight, is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher. And he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then what happens is... So you think the
individual mandate's a good idea?
You shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying health care once you get past 70. So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret.
Can I address that?
I apologize. We're out of time.
ahead,
We have a
Nora.
number of subjects to discuss. Margaret.
Let's talk about families in America. There is a child care crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family and medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family and medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start, the family works better, we stay in their employers, we get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota, and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue, those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some places, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of child care model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with child care. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide child care in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote child care because, look, it is unacceptable. And, you know, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on childcare as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as childcare is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, child care options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the child care shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, if those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with childcare and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy's growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that, to me, is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day. Some with the American flag, several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret?
Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that. We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance, I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement. But this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So, America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News vice presidential debate continues.
Oh, well, that was really something. That was really, really something. I mean, he was saying, what was that about, shutting down debate? And it's like, you're literally weaponized the DOJ to go after Trump, and you shut down debate about the election interference and COVID. And he's just like in denial. He's just got this shocked face, like, how dare you fact check me in real time, JD Vance? What do you how do you think it's going so far?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very interesting as well. Hillary Clinton still says that she won that. Sorry, I'll bring that mic closer. Hopefully you guys can hear me at home. Yeah, I mean, Hillary Clinton still says that, she didn't trust the election outcomes. Stacey Abrams, is it, from Georgia, has always said that there were problems with the governor's race there. But look, as far as the debate's concerned, I actually quite like this debate. This is what I think we should be seeing from debates. If anybody's ever watched the Richard Nixon JFK debate, which I think was one of the first debates that ever happened at a presidential level, it was quite good. So I do like this, and to be fair to Tim Walz, he does look uncomfortable. He does look nervous. It's a little bit difficult. Well, I almost feel sorry for him, to be honest. But he does come across actually as being quite pragmatic and quite likeable. And I think that if he wasn't running with Kamala Harris, he'd probably be a very effective congressperson or senator. But I don't think that his leadership, I don't think is a leader at this level, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I've changed my mind about both of them actually, because I have been saying for quite a while that I don't think that JD Vance was the best pick for Trump. I also don't think that he's his future presidential material. I've changed my mind about that. I think that he's actually done a very, very good job. I don't see him winning. A lot can happen in 4 years. if Trump wins the next election, I don't think that he'll win the one after it in 2028, but I certainly think that he has an opportunity, to come back a little bit older and have a real play at the presidency.
It doesn't happen super often where the VP goes on to become the president, does it? It's usually a problem if you've got like an alpha male as your VP later. Like, they don't just become an alpha after they're one in their own right, and they wait for their turn to run to be president, right?
Yeah, well, but it also doesn't happen very often that you have a split presidency where you have a president who loses an election and comes back. Ronald Reagan's VP was George Bush Sr. He became the president, and Bill Clinton, absolutely smashed him. In that next election. So, it does happen, but I don't really see him as being the next candidate or the next winner for the Republicans. And so it'll be very interesting to see what the Republicans do post-Trump. I also think it'll be very interesting to see what the Democrats do, because it sounds like, by the way that Tim Walz is speaking, and you can only really take him at his word, it sounds like he's being a lot more pragmatic and prepared to listen to and consider Republican viewpoints on some things. And so that would indicate to me that Democrats, perhaps behind the scenes, are recognising that they need to move back towards the centre. But I don't think that bodes very well for Kamala Harris.
It's a very substantive and policy-driven debate, isn't it? It's actually, in terms of the depth of it, there's not really, compared to the last debate, there was a lot of like me, a little bit between them. This was actually a sort of almost more of an old-school style debate, a bit more amicable, a bit of a bromance you mentioned during it. It has been a nice change of pace.
Well, I think it needed to happen as well. We're in this situation where Harris has come in, and people say, she was coronated and things like that. But look, the reality is that people were saying for a long time that Biden wasn't up to it. We'll continue this after.
Sorry, guys, they're just coming back for some closing comments where they're both given, I think, a couple of minutes. So here we go.
Senator Vance won the virtual coin toss and elected to go last. So, Governor Walz, you are first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country, and one where our politics can be better than it is. And I have to tell you, that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something. Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage, and then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you. Senator Vance, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Norah O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35 days until Election Day. Please get out and vote. And for all of us here at CBS News, thank you and good night.
I want to keep watching.
The first and only vice presidential debate. This election is now complete.
Exactly.
It was a cordial debate of the kind that people mostly say they want. You notice here the two candidates lingering on the stage. That's quite a difference from the presidential debate, in which it was not even sure that Vice President Harris and Donald Trump would shake hands.
It'd be funny if they're not
amicable. It was
amicable.
A debate in which the line, I appreciate what Tim said about Finland, was one of the many ways in which Senator Vance agreed with the governor. The governor agreed right back. But that's the tone and the kind of theater review of this. I'll pick out two issues on the question of the top of the news today, which is the Middle East and the kinds of foreign policy surprises that hit.
Let's see what the spin is.
Tim
I'm
Walz
curious
made
how
the
they
case
spin
that Donald
it
Trump's
straight away.
temperament is unfit for any kind of surprise, cited the members of the Trump administration who have attested to that. Vance came back and said there were no wars during the Trump administration. On the economy, I'll make a political point, which is that what Vance did was something Donald Trump was incapable of doing during his presidential debate, which is repeatedly saying, if Kamala Harris was going to do these things, why didn't she in office? Now, whether voters buy that or not, Tim Walz mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act and a variety of other items under Biden. But returning to that political point has worked in the past for Donald Trump against Hillary Clinton. We'll see if it works this time. I'd like to make a final point on tone. The J.D. Vance on that stage was very different than what people may have seen in podcasts. But then there was an air of unreality about it. He talked about bipartisan solutions with nuance of a kind we never saw during the Trump administration. He talked about Donald Trump almost as the defender of the Affordable Care Act. Donald Trump tried to kill the Affordable Care Act. And then I think at the very end of the debate, we saw something extraordinary. Tim Walz asked J.D. Vance if Donald Trump lost the election. He was incapable of answering that simple yes-no question. J.D. Vance can only get so far from the man at the top of the ticket, and that was on display in that one moment, although J.D. Vance was a different kind of person than we've seen in many instances.
John, I think what you're saying is so important when we talk about demeanor, because of the expectation that was hanging over these candidates' heading into tonight. J.D. Vance came to the stage with the lowest likability rating of all 4 candidates at the top of the ticket. And I think many people came in expecting him to be Donald Trump's attack dog tonight. That's not the side we saw from him. There was a couple of compassionate moments even. You mentioned the word cordiality. We saw that from him very much. I also think it's worth pointing out the demeanor we saw from Governor Walz, particularly when it came to his moments where he was put on the defensive about his own biography and embellishments that he has made in the past, particularly in this case on China. You and I have talked about this a lot.
I'm pretty much done with this. I'm not really getting much value out of that. I thought that was very amicable. I thought it was a very interesting debate. I thought that the points that JD Vance made were quite salient. I think that he was on a very good game compared to Trump's, to be honest. I thought Trump was not on his best game because we've seen what he's capable of in the past. When it comes to the way Twitter's been responding, I mean, they've just been memeing the heck out of Walz and how he's been going about the whole thing.
He said at one point that he's friends with school shooters. I know that that's not what he meant to say, but and I actually hope that the Republicans don't take that and run that as a campaign ad, because that would be unfair. But it was it was a poor slip up. But certainly the knucklehead comment. I'm a knucklehead. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, that, as you said, that one's going to be run really well. Tim Pool's written a new meme format has dropped, and this is what I'm looking at now on Twitter. So it's because JD Vance did constantly look at the time remaining during it, so they've obviously done a screen grab of that. But I'm just doing a scroll through of all the memes from that. But don't mind me. But that was really interesting to see him reference a biblical verse as well. He made reference to Matthew 25:40, and he was talking on immigration, Walz, and he made the point that when we're talking about immigrants, we've got to take care of these people, and without really, obviously, you can't quote the whole Bible in this, but he basically said, "And the king will answer and say to them, assuredly I say to you, insomuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me." It's funny because the next verse then says, "Then he will also say to those on the left hand, depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." And then they will answer him, and then it goes on. So obviously you can't quote the whole thing, but I thought it was hilarious that there was an immediate rebuke in the verses following. But
although to be fair, the Bible version of who's on his left is not quite what we'd applied today. But yes, it was probably a poor choice of verse to quote, 100%. And he would have researched that and found it to deliver it. So
yeah. 100%. He's like, this will win me. I can win votes.
I'll win the Catholics over. Yeah. Good luck with that.
What do you think, compared to the last one especially?
Oh, look, I think it was a lot better, but I'll say it was a lot better on the Republican side because JD Vance got into some issues and I think explained things more elegantly than what Donald Trump does. And he also, there was a question he was asked about the election in 2020. And I sort of groaned a little bit thinking, he's not going to answer this question because he started off not answering it. And then he immediately said, but let me answer the question directly that you've actually asked. So I thought that was really good that he did that. I think that, again, with Tim Walz, I think he has expanded a little bit on policy. He's shown a bit of humility as well, which is quite good. Kamala Harris hasn't shown that humility. He has actually come back and he's given JD Vance a few compliments along the way, where he's actually said to them, said to the viewers, I believe that JD Vance really does genuinely care about immigration. I believe that he cares. I have to find my notes. I think it had something to do with healthcare and things like that. So I thought that was good to show the humility of giving some credit to him for that. So I can see people liking him more. I guess the real question is this going to be enough to swing the election? Yeah. Is it going to change anyone's mind?
Yeah, who will actually help?
Look, I think there could be some people who are undecided that might. I don't see very many people who at this point are leaning towards voting for Donald Trump who would watch this and watch the performance from Tim Walz and say, actually, I'm now going to vote for the Democrats. And I don't see that those people that are already leaning towards voting for Kamala Harris are going to say, well, actually, I'm so impressed by J.D. Vance's answers that I'm now going to switch across to the Republicans. There's going to be some, but I don't think it's going to be enough to make a significant difference. And ultimately, it's also the most important states in this election are going to be Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, especially with Pennsylvania. On one of the other podcasts I'm on, we had a pollster that came on a few nights ago, and he has predicted a 66% chance of Harris winning. I think that those odds are way off. However, I asked him a specific question about Pennsylvania, and he said, look, if she doesn't win Pennsylvania, there's a 93% chance of Trump winning. So I think that the big question is going to be, how much would this debate have affected the voters in Pennsylvania? And I don't see that this is going to have much of an effect, which is unfortunate because we should have had these debates much earlier. And just lastly, not to ramble for too long, Vivek Ramaswamy, amongst many others, but Vivek Ramaswamy in the Republican presidential nominee debates made a comment to the Democrats, and he said, we all know that Biden's not going to run, so can you just be honest with us about who is going to run so that we can have some debates and we can find out, what everybody thinks and we can debate the ideas. I'm paraphrasing what he said.
Yeah,
and the Democrats just refused to do that. They said it was a right-wing talking point, it was a conspiracy theory, etc. I think that there's a lot of people who are not going to forgive the Democrats for that. I think there's a lot of Democrats who in this election cycle feel aggrieved in a similar way to the Bernie bros feeling aggrieved.
Oh, it's the same people.
Yeah.
100%. And if there's any of Bernie bros left that haven't jumped to the Trump train, like myself, 100%, the radical people that actually get out, get the stuff done, they're at polling places, not polling places like Australia, you can't campaign outside polling places in America. They're doing the door knocking, they're doing the ballot harvesting, which is legal in many states. They're doing a lot of the things that actually get it across that line, that extra percentage that the Republicans aren't willing to do, but they're doing this election cycle. I reckon they are really butthurt about the fact they're not actually... They didn't do a proper primary. She never got a delegate in 2020. She never got a delegate in this election. They just rammed roughshod over it. They knew exactly what they were doing. They hedged their bets. They curb-tailed RFK, Kennedy, for God's sake. There wasn't a proper primary. And there were a lot of candidates who wanted to run. We had Cenk Uygur from TYT, so all of his crowd. We had old mate, what's that black campaigner's name? Cornel West ran as well. Yes. It's just the whole thing's a sham. The whole thing, they're just making a mockery of the entire situation. And it was funny because even the debates, historically, the debates are run by that debate organization that does the formal setup. They haven't set it up at all this time around. And to make matters worse, going back a very long time, the second debate between the presidents, the presidential candidates, is always with a live audience, where they can sort of bypass the media and get a bit more of an authentic, question from the audience of undecided voters. That never happened. It's not going to happen. The whole thing's just a sham.
It's interesting, actually, that with the coin tosses, when the Democrats win it, they want to go first and let the Republicans have the final say in all the debates. And when the Republicans win it, they also want that. And you might as well have a coin toss. So I'm being very, very surprised by that. The lack of an audience, I'm surprised by that as well, especially in such a contentious and divided country. I think it's interesting if you look at it from an Australian perspective, because people have said to me, especially after my last appearance here where we talked about taxes, I'm not against paying taxes. I think that we all should pay taxes. I think there's an obligation for us to pay taxes. But I think the taxes should be fair, they should be reasonable, and they shouldn't be punitive or confiscatory. That's an issue that is affecting every Western country. The other issue that's affecting every Western country is what we're going to do to provide social services to everybody. Now, there are social services that we all need collectively, healthcare, roads, things like that. If you're lucky enough to live in New South Wales as opposed to Victoria, you'd be very impressed. The new M8, the new metro line, there's been some great infrastructure projects under Labor and Liberals. So I'm very impressed with that. Those are the sorts of things that we want our tax dollars to go towards. But what we've seen is an issue with people not being able to afford to eat or sometimes having to skip meals. We've seen people not be able to afford to get into housing. Now, in the past, this has been an issue that the left has dominated the right on. Centre-left parties like the Labor Party of Paul Keating's era, the Democrats of yesteryear, this was an issue that they could dominate on, but that's not happening right now. What you've got today is people who are very reasonable, who say, look, I don't want to see people not having enough to eat. I don't want to see children going to school where, some of those kids haven't eaten dinner, haven't had breakfast, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
That's a problem that anybody with any heart or conscience would look at our countries and say, we are so wealthy, this shouldn't be allowed to happen. The problem that the centre-left has, in my opinion, is that those sorts of people that want to see reasonable social services being provided are actually moving across to centre-right parties. Centre-right parties are moving to the left on these issues because they know that that's what people want. And if you take, for example, the Springfield issue that was brought up today, Donald Trump, I think, even if it was true, which I don't think it is, he shouldn't have said that they're eating cats and dogs. Now, I know there's that great song that's going around and they've memeified all of this. He shouldn't have said that. I don't think that was helpful. Having said that, when you actually look into the issue, there are people in Springfield who are saying, look, housing's gone up. These guys are getting government support, which means that they can afford to buy housing. They've increased demand, and we who have lived in this house for 10 or 15 years, now all of a sudden we've got nowhere to go. That's a problem. It's an issue. Now, in the past, you would see right-wing parties say, well, if you can't afford it, move to a cheaper place, move out to the country, move somewhere else, right? Well, Springfield is not exactly an inner-city area. So what you're actually seeing is people on the centre-right who are saying this is a problem, people can't afford to survive, at the same time as you're seeing the people on the left go, well, stop blaming the immigrants. So, yeah, I think the left is in for some hurt, and I think there's some real similarities between the issues they're talking about. They talked about misinformation. They've talked about healthcare. Their healthcare system is way different to ours, but we talk about, problems within the funding system for our healthcare, the NDIS, all these sorts of things that we talk about in Australia. Education's another issue that we talk about. Social services for older people is something that we talk about here as well. And, of course, immigration. So I think our issues are very, very similar. And that big one, which was on censorship, that's an issue that we're seeing in the UK. That's an issue that we're seeing, obviously, here in Australia. And I'm led to believe the bill will be defeated. I certainly hope it will be.
Yeah, Canada as well. They've got their own thing, and New Zealand as well with their media.
But we're seeing such a push by our governments to do these sorts of things. And as I've said, the last couple of times I've appeared here and on other podcasts, look, there is no mandate for this. The people don't want it. I'm not necessarily advocating for democracy over republicanism. I think that the republic style of government is better. But the reason why Republican style of government is better, in my view, is because under that sort of system, you have constitutional rights. You have the ability to restrain government from infringing on your personal individual rights, even if the majority decides that your rights should be infringed on. That's not what we're seeing.
No.
What we're seeing is politicians that don't have the support of the majority of people, and they don't have the support of the Constitution or the Magna Carta or the Bill of Rights or whatever system you've got, who are saying, well, we're just going to throw all that out and this is what we're going to impose on you. Why? It makes no sense to me.
Makes no sense. And in terms of the reaction to all of this online, I mean, how people are just enjoying the sort of run down to the bottom. They're just really unhappy with what's been going on. All they can do is sort of make fun of the whole situation and the whole how this debate's played out. But I mentioned to you while we were watching it, the internet always wins. And these are some of the memes that are coming out. If you look at my Twitter feed, this is from Anna Paulina Luna. Trump Vance 2024 Not friends with school shooters. Another one is...
I'm good with that as memes, but I don't want to see that be an official Republican a campaign message, because that would be unfair. We all know that he didn't mean to say that. Yeah, this is good.
This one's good. CB News Vice Presidential, just looking at Rami likes that one. So this is the scene where Walz was caught out by CBS. This is one of the few moments the media actually did their job, which I thought was quite good.
Those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this is I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protest went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Thank you.
Those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Micro emotions are astonishing. I mean, if you watch it on mute, it tells you everything you need to know. Everything.
Yeah, what did they say in the Biden-Trump debate? Everyone came out and said, look, when you watch a debate, there's two things that you should do. Listen to the debate without watching it, and watch it without listening to it. And yeah, look, as I said, I always feel sorry for the man. I think that I like him as a person more than I did before. He's certainly more personable, but he's sort of, I know he's like the old guy at the bar that you know, wasn't it your shout this time? And you know what I mean? Yeah. But also, like, towards the end there, like in his you know, sort of conclusion or whatever, he made reference to Kamala Harris's talking points of it's an opportunity economy. What does that mean? What does it even mean? You know what I mean? Like, that's just saying something that has no real meaning to it. The other one was, it's the politics of joy.
God, when did you say that?
Yeah, like, well, what does politics of joy mean? And I get this. I hear people say to me all the time, not all the time, but a lot of people say, well, you're ethnically, you know, by blood Indian. I'm like 2,000 generations away from there. But anyway, you're ethnically Indian, so, you know, you should be joyful that Kamala Harris is going to win. Well, Rishi Sunak became the Prime Minister on my side, on the Tory side. I am British, for those of you that aren't aware of that. I'm a dual citizen. You know, I am a Tory supporter. I'm a Liberal Party supporter here, although these days you've convinced me to preference some of the smaller parties.
The conviction parties.
Yes. But I wasn't sitting there going, oh, I'm so you know, celebratory now that because Rishi Sunak's you know, Indian. In the same way that Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, I'm not celebrating the fact that he's Indian. Like, and he's got the same surname as many members of my family. I'm not like, oh yeah, he's one of us. And so, yeah, we all have our different opinions. And India's got a population of what, 1.3, 1.4 billion people, and there's probably, I have no idea what number of Indians outside of India live around the world. So what are we supposed to do? Like, just every time we see an Indian, I agree with you. Then you see another Indian, I agree with you, even if they don't agree. I mean, it's silly.
Nate, you reminded me of an email I got the other day. One of the most bizarre emails I've gotten in the last 4 years.
Can I have your date of birth, your credit card, your address? Is that the email?
After I gave that guy the details, what is it, the Nigerian prince email scam. No, I did an email out this week for the misinfo bills, getting petition signatures and everything. I get this bizarre piece of advice from someone. Out of love. I fully know it was out of love. And this is what they wrote. They said, go live a good life in Dubai, Habibi. Euro trash scum just using you. And I thought, you know, I know that they're saying that out of love, but this is literally my home. Where am I going to go? Where am I going to go? Lebanon's being flattened. I'm 3/4 Lebanese, and Syria's, or the other quarter is Syrian, and that place was definitely like flattened and destroyed. It's only just sort of coming back with markets and everything. It's like, you know, there's a lot of immigrants that are here that have been grandfathered in. You know, my grandparents and my dad, they're all buried here in Australia. I mean, this is literally, it doesn't get more at home than that. Yeah, I got to do a whole podcast on what's going on in Lebanon right now because it's heartbreaking. I mean, the destruction of the historical monuments from these wars is just nuts.
Look, I think, obviously you and I are not white. Well, I am apparently. According to America, I
actually have a drop. I have a single drop, but go on.
Okay, anyway, I won't even say what I was going to say there.
Sure.
So, we're immigrant. Well, our families have immigrated to this country. One of the producers of the show here is also, similar to us, and the guest who's unfortunately not with us today, similar to us. The leader of the Proud Boys, same sort of thing. So and all that they can do is, you're right-wing extremists, you're white supremacists, or you're traitors to your race. No, we're not actually. We believe in the core values of this country. We know that, for me, I was a little bit older. I know that there was a time when I experienced some racism in this country, but it was a long time ago. I moved to Sydney when I was 10 or 11 or something, 12, and it was different here. It's different back in Western Australia. We are much more welcoming. We have multiculturalism. We're a melting pot. You can go out today and have Greek food for lunch, have Italian for dinner, have Chinese tomorrow, have an Arabic dish for lunch. There's an assortment of different foods, an assortment of different cultures. And one of the things is that we are prepared to accept each other and treat each other fairly. We generally don't discriminate too much. There is some levels of discrimination. I'm not going to get a job at an Italian deli, more than likely, because nobody will. Even Italians won't get a job at the Italian deli because it's got to go to the sister and the cousin and the uncle, right?
Same with the Lebanese. If you chop the tabbouleh the wrong way, you're out.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
But that's not racism. So I think, when we look at what our core values are in this country, when people like you and I say it, and I know that you've been described as a tinfoil hat wearing, conspiracy theorist and all sorts of things, and there are things that you and I disagree on. There are positions that you've had, I won't name them on air, you're welcome to, where I've just gone, I'm not going with you on that actually. I'm not sure I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Or even where I've strongly said, I absolutely think you're wrong about that. We don't hate each other because of it. We need to be able to get back to that. And the way that politics has gone, and you notice this with the Democrats, orange man bad. Trump did this, Trump did that, Trump's going to do all these things. No, he's not. He was already there. He didn't do the things that you're talking about. And as for the 2020 election, lots of people have problems with it. Lots of people around the world look at that and go,
what was that?
This should have been...
In the French.
Investigated. There should have been an official inquiry into this issue. And I'll just remind everybody, when Trump won in 2016, Democrats were actively out there. In fact, celebrities went on and did this huge advertisement campaign telling the electors not to give the votes to Donald Trump.
Yeah, I've got a video right here of that, actually.
And to be fair to Joe Biden, who was at that time the VP in charge of the Senate, he actually gavelled them down and said, no, none of that, right? So he actually did what he was supposed to do. But they still asked for it. And, of course, when Republicans do it, they're the worst people on earth. Where's the fairness in that? It's not.
No,
that's not how it should be.
That's right, and it's about who has a bigger mic.
Yep.
Sorry, before I bring up that particular section, this was breaking news. CNN admit that Tim Walz actually lost the debate.
I think there was a clear lack of preparation and execution here on Walz's part.
I think actually it's the opposite. I think he had too much preparation.
Maybe, yeah.
He had so many lines that he was clearly trying to say that he didn't listen and said when J.D. Vance said one of the many things he really hit Kamala Harris on, not Tim Walz, but Kamala Harris, he didn't respond because he clearly had things in his mind. I think the lack of interviews that he has done with national media, with local media, it showed. He needed more reps.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, J.D. Vance is much more experienced at this, at public speaking, at defending himself, at pivoting.
I think that he lost the debate because he was over-prepared. Well, and therefore he should do more preparation interviews with us so that we can make money.
Nice to hear Dana Bash Dana Bash going down that path. And Vance is saying that a 40-year-old... So actually, J.D. Vance is slightly younger than me. Vance is saying that a 40-year-old senator has more experience. Well, you know what? You know whose fault that is? It's the Democrats' fault. Because the Democrats should have admitted that Joe Biden actually was as feeble as the rest of us were saying, and then had an open convention. Yeah. Or if they really wanted to push Kamala Harris, push her in there, fine. But they should have done that a year ago, 6 months ago, right? Instead of running this bullshit campaign... Oh, sorry, I swore on your program again. Instead of running this bulldust campaign... You know, he didn't fall down the stairs. It was a very windy day, and he got blown down 3 times. Yep. He wasn't staring off, you know, into space. And Giorgia Meloni, from Italy, had to go and get him and bring him back. Oh no, those are cheap fakes. No, like we could all see it. And then when the debate happened, it was completely obvious. Yep. Then they've tried to run this line that Joe Biden is this amazing person. And his legacy is absolutely incredible and fantastic because he decided, out of the kindness of his heart, to step aside to let a younger generation take over. No, nobody's buying that. Even Democrats. Look, my phone's been going wild, and I do have a lot of friends who are Democrats. God bless them. But even they have said to me that they're not buying that. Right? They'll defend her. They'll still vote for her. No problems. Right? It's a democracy. We have different opinions. But that sort of stuff, they're not buying. But I'll come back to what I said before. There are Democrats out there who are very, very unhappy with how this has played out, with how Kamala Harris became the nominee. And what Democrats, in my opinion, Democrats and especially their supporters, their hardcore supporters, a third of the country that will vote for them no matter what they're doing, or my impression of them, is that they're not prepared to accept one single iota of criticism, constructive or otherwise. They're not prepared to accept it from the other side, but they're also not prepared to accept it from within.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit like a tribe. You know, Tim Pool made the point. You can't actually define this group by an identity, by policy, by whatever. It's literally a cult. So one day this will be the party line, and another day this will be the party line, and it could totally contradict what you were saying the day before. And you have to be prepared. You have to constantly be on the ball. Otherwise, you'll be excommunicated in financially, by association, your job, money, everything. And so that's how this cult actually works. You're constantly trying to keep up with the latest. And you know what's funny? No one will admit it, but that's happening on the Trump side of politics as well. And I think it's a really fascinating psychological phenomenon, which hasn't yet started in Australia, but because we don't have because we don't have a figurehead. Yeah. So when you have a figurehead, you have a pope. When you have a pope, you have Christ on earth, because that's the concept of the pope. The Catholics believe that he's Christ on earth, and he can interpret the Bible and write it down in the Catechism, you know, which is their sort of it's higher than the Bible, they say. Similarly, with Trump, with Farage, with whoever ends up being that person, if they say today, this is happening, they're eating the dogs, got to defend it. If Kamala says, I've been to the border, all the Democrats, she's been to the border. She's been to the border.
So I take it by your comments then that you're quite pleased that we have Albo, who certainly can't be a pope, and Dutton, who certainly can't be a pope. It's actually a good thing for Australia, based on what you're saying, because we're not turning into America.
Pretty much. Look, but you're not wrong. I mean, these things are... The freedom movement is a fickle thing in Australia, and they do generally do these weird coordinations without coordination, where they constantly try to outdo each other in being woke, but our form of wokeness on the right is conspiracy theories. So they're like, okay, so you admit that this happened, but I'm going to do you one further, and they go further down the rabbit hole, and it sounds even more outlandish. They don't pull themselves up back to reason. They actually keep going all the way down without limit, because they've lost all principle.
Look, I like the freedom movement. I think there's some nut jobs in it, but there's some nut jobs in any movement. But I like the freedom movement. I like what they were advocating for in the vaccine mandates and that sort of stuff through COVID. This is not a new phenomenon, but talk about misinformation. if somebody wants to tell me that NASA faked the moon landings, I don't believe that that's accurate. But I'd be happy to sit down at a pub and have a few beers with somebody who wanted to discuss this with me and tell me all the reasons why they faked it. Cool. I'm there.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So
that's fine. But we've talked about this previously.
Yeah.
Where both sides cross the line is when they start shutting down debate.
Absolutely.
That's the tell, because it's like you're not willing to talk about X, Y, Z. And some of my examples, I just realized I can't say them on camera because it will get cancelled. But you're not, because I don't hold these views, but this is what people say. You're not going far enough to do this, this, and this. Therefore, you're not woke enough on the right, or you're not woke enough on the left. So on the left, if you're not willing to say at this point in time, sovereignty was never ceded on the Aboriginal issue, or that climate change, you've got, 1 year before we all die, or, coming to the Palestine thing, on the left, they say, if you're not willing to say, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, you're excommunicated. And on the right, it's like a completely different paradigm, but it is also, they cancel people. They cancel people if you don't have the exact same view on Israel. They cancel people if you don't believe that, colonialism was blemishless. They cancel you on the really, really far right if you believe that, some immigration is actually quite good if you go far right enough. There's also stuff on the jab I won't go into as well.
I think it actually gets worse than what you're saying, though, because it's not good enough for you to just not agree with somebody. What we're seeing now is that you have to not just agree. This is more on the left, more on what they describe as the woke left, where not only do you have to agree, but you have to vocally express it, even when it's something that you know nothing about. I was in California, and there was a particular piece of infrastructure that they were talking about building, and I knew nothing about it. It's the first time I'd ever been to this particular place, and we were listening to everybody. They said, "Oh, so what do you think?" And I said, "Oh, the drawing looks good. Yeah, that looks cool. Good luck." Oh, and like immediately all these people were like, "No, it doesn't look good. It's terrible. How could you say such a thing?" Well, I was like, "Okay, it doesn't look good then. No, like you shouldn't do it. Sorry, okay." And then the other group of people was like, "Yes, we should." But I'm like, "Look, dude, I'm from Australia.
Chill out.
I've been here for like 25 minutes. Like we're doing a tour. Like I know nothing. Well, you should educate yourself." No.
Yeah.
I'm not going to educate myself.
Yeah.
Like if you're watching this show and there's something happening in, I don't know, Parramatta. I don't live in Parramatta. I don't go to Parramatta very often.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not going to educate myself about the issues in Parramatta because I don't care. I don't live there.
Yeah. It's like, why don't you educate yourself on the Zulu Wars?
Exactly.
It's like, I don't know, maybe there's 200 other countries I can barely keep up with.
I'd like to actually ask you your because we both had a laugh about this, the concepts of a plan.
In the last debate, Trump and
but the response on this debate, I'm putting it myself on this screen, but the debate, JD Vance responded and Tim Walz responded to the concepts of a plan comment. What was your take on that?
Yeah, so I mean, Vance made the point, look, to address the concepts of a plan comment, Trump didn't completely outlay the complexities of an economic policy on a debate stage. You all would have been put to sleep. And Walz actually had his best zinger comment back. He said, they have more than concepts of, they have worse than a concept of a plan. It was really efficiently put the way he said it. I thought that was brilliant in sort of debunking the whole thing. But
I thought JD Vance did a great job of covering that. I really did. He wasn't the attack dog that everyone was expecting him to be. I thought he
was going to be more aggressive today.
Yeah,
100%.
I thought that looked. I think he did a good job. But all things being fair, and I'll go on record now. I'm very happy to go on record. If I had the ability to vote in the American election, which all we have to do is cross the southern border apparently, but that's a different story. If I had the ability to cross to vote in that election, I would vote for Donald Trump, and not because of his personality or anything like that, but because I agree more with his economic policy. I think it's more well thought out. It's more consistent with the viewpoints that I have in relation to the economy. I also think, to be honest with you, he actually deserves it at this point. The man has been hammered by the judiciary. He's had the DOJ absolutely go after him in ways that they shouldn't have. He's had local prosecutors go after him in ways that they shouldn't have. They've weaponised the justice system in a way that is quite destabilising, I think. And they've attempted to assassinate him twice.
Mate, fact check. Do you remember that line about the only 2% of the border wall being built? Turns out to be complete crap. Complete crap. I found a fact check on it. Trump, during that time, he built or amended and rebuilt like 500 miles of wall. And you just simple search, what's the US border with Mexico? How big is it? It's almost 2,000 miles. So I was like, okay, so 25%, he either built a wall or he actually amended the wall and fixed it up. So 25% of the wall there, but how much was missing? I don't know. It might be way higher than 25% that he'd actually worked on, that he promised to put up. And so I thought
some of it would be water.
Some of it would be water.
Some of it's also not crossable, even without a wall. Some of it's not crossable. But just remember that Congress blocked it and blocked the funding for it. Then he tried to get the funding for military. And if memory serves me correctly, it really wasn't an awful lot of money. It was like $5 billion.
It's not much.
Right?
Yeah, it's not much.
Which, again, is a lot to us as human beings, as individual people. But for a government, especially for the United States, $5 billion is nothing.
Yeah.
So, Kamala Harris says it's his vanity project. Tim Walz says, well, if the wall's 10 foot high, I'll get a factory building 12 foot high ladders. They're not taking this issue seriously at all. Kamala Harris also made the comment in one of her recent interviews that Donald Trump's not taking these issues seriously when it comes to tariffs. What is she proposing? And I'm very surprised, actually, that J.D. Vance didn't bring up the 25% unrealised capital gains tax. And a lot of people I've spoken to recently, Republicans, Democrats, people here in Australia that are on the conservative side and on the left side, have said to me, yeah, but it's only for people that are over 100 million. My standard response has always been, yes, but those people, especially if you're talking about California startups, tech company startups, often these companies, unicorns that have a $1 billion market cap, the people that own those companies often don't have an awful lot of money themselves. It's just that the market cap theoretically of their companies are worth a heap. And so if you start taxing them, you basically what you can do is you're going to force those businesses overseas. But more to the point, when taxes were first brought out in the United States, they pitched it that only the very wealthy were going to pay for it. Only the very wealthy. Now everybody pays.
Yeah.
Right? So whatever taxes they're saying, they're going to trial it here. Eventually it'll trickle down. The same thing with the modest tax increase that the Labor Party put on superannuation fund. Very, very modest, a doubling of the taxes for one group of people. And people say, well, people have got more than 3 million, who cares? You're going to care, because inflation's going to keep up. We know that there's always bracket keep, because they never actually adjust these up under Liberals or Labor Party. They never adjust these rates up. And eventually, what will happen is that your retirement income, your superannuation fund, when you've only got a modest, 500,000 or 800,000 or something to last you the rest of your life from the time that you retire, is going to end up subject to a higher rate of tax.
The hidden tax.
Yeah.
What did you think about the comment? And it was very quickly skimmed past, but I know you remember this. The Wall Street speculating one. Tim Walz, he was talking about a bill to be passed, and he said something about it being opposed and whatever. It's like, if you want people to stop trading stocks, then we should have passed like some sort of a Wall Street speculating bill. And he was complaining about that, and I thought, bro, in your own party, you've got the worst people that like Nancy Pelosi doing that whole speculation thing. I'm assuming that's what it's about, insider trading and trading the markets as a Congress person, using insider knowledge by being on some of these committees like defense and whatever. But I just thought that was so rich when that was mentioned.
I think that he was more referencing real estate prices and the cost of housing. And he is partially correct. I'm going to speak against my own interests on this issue. He is partially correct. Private equity companies have gone in and bought not just residential property, but they've also started buying, what they call trailer parks over there. And that's really the last bastion of affordable housing for people. And what they've done is they've bought these up, and they realise that they can raise the rent a little bit because there's enough of a market to be able to, if you lose some tenants, new people will move in. These movable homes are really not that movable. It's not like here in Australia, you don't see it as much. You see people that maybe use them as retirement, they'll have a caravan somewhere or something like that. But over there, you actually do see families living in them. And what private equity companies have done is they've looked at the return on their investment and said, hey, we can make 20%. I think the average return on them is about 22% per annum. That's a pretty decent return. So they've gone up and they've bought them all. Then they've increased the rent, and they're making hay. The problem with that is that you are displacing people because they can't afford to give any more, and you're taking from the poorest people in the country the little that they've got left. I understand why people would have a problem with this kind of capitalism, right? I don't actually think it is capitalism, because capitalism normally, in order for you to make money, you've got to serve a great deal of people, and those people will come to you and, voluntarily give you their money. You don't hold them over a barrel. And a lot of the time, these companies get away with things that other people couldn't do because of their government connections. Yes, that is absolutely a problem. I'm not sure that the solutions that are being espoused by the Democrats would work, but I would also say that the more significant issue that is facing the United States in relation to the housing prices is that they've had 10 to 12 million people that have come into the country that are documented. Allegedly 10 million that have come in that are gotaways or aren't documented at all. You're going to put 20 million people in the country, it's going to drive prices up. There's just no way around that. It's going to drive prices up. And that fact check from Margaret Brennan, who, she rubs me. That for those that are watching, that's the woman in pink. That really rubbed me the wrong way, I tell you. I don't imagine dating her. Like that just, what a nightmare. But when she came in with the Haitian immigrants are legally admitted, yes, they are. And what JD Vance's response was absolutely correct as well, right? They've been temporarily paroled. Now, I've got that CBP One app because I travel to the US a fair bit, but there's conditions. I'm only allowed to be there for, 90 days or whatever it is, and then I have to leave. Now, if I overstay my visa or my visa waiver entry, I would expect there to be consequences. So me because I've applied for some reason, maybe I've broken my leg. I'm in the United States, I've broken my leg, and I'm 80 days into my 90-day stay, and then I apply to the United States and say, hey, can I please stay for a bit longer because I've broken my leg and I need some time before I get flight clearance. The United States will generally give that to people. It's compassionate circumstances. They'll say, yeah, make sure your leg heals and then get on a plane and go home. Now, if I then start trying to work, or if I then start trying to buy a house or rent a house or something, that's going to put upward pressure on the markets. Now, if it's one person doing it, America will go, yeah, fair enough, that happens. But when you're talking about people en masse, millions and millions and millions of people doing that, of course people are going to get upset. I don't know why Margaret Brennan actually tried to...
Can you give me an example? What did she ask? Do
you have it? Actually, I think that came from Nora O'Donnell. Do you have any evidence to back up
the fact that immigration is driving up housing?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I don't know, supply and demand. I mean, for God's sake, it's basic economics. If you've got more people coming in, millions a year, millions, maybe even tens of millions, they couldn't even give you a firm answer. Of course, it's going to affect it. They've got to sleep somewhere. They're not just sleeping on the streets, and they are.
I would ask this question to Democrats and to people who feel as though they like these ideas from the Labor parties, from Democrats: higher taxes, more regulations, more immigration. Why don't we have that as our foreign policy then? When we talk about the poorest countries in Africa, why don't we say to them, hey, you know what you should do? You should increase your taxes. You should increase government regulation. And let's, if you've got a country like Kenya, it's got a population of 60 million. We should say to them, hey, look, You should have an extra 10 million, or whatever the numbers are in the UK at the moment. You should bring in another 10 million people that don't speak your language, that don't know your culture, and that don't have anywhere to go. Yeah, you should use your taxpayers' dollars to pay for them, because that's a great policy that's going to build economic growth. I mean, we wouldn't suggest that in the first place to those countries. So why are we here expected to accept it in our countries?
Wouldn't suggest diversity too. Yeah,
diversity. You know what you need, Africa? You need more white people.
Can I just say, there was no, as you said before, there's no audience at this particular debate. Now, if you guys didn't know, Dr. Phil has a cable news channel called Merit Street, and a lot of the clips are uploaded onto his YouTube channel. And he actually has a live audience there now, and he's actually still going, he's still streaming, and he's getting Americans' opinions. And I've got one clip, at least, that's uploaded to it. This is from Dr. Phil. Do you agree with this opinion on Walz's comment on gun control? And this is what was asked or said.
Did you hear anything tonight that really disturbed you from either candidate? Something you heard from them where you said, no, I wouldn't have said that, or I wouldn't have talked about it. Yes, sir. Stand up. Say your first name.
I'm Dave. And the thing that concerned me the most was when they were talking about guns, and Walz just ended by saying, sometimes it's just the guns. That, I mean, my jaw hit the floor on that, because JD was trying to explain to us how mental health plays an issue, other things plays an issue. He wasn't pinpointing it, and Walz said, well, sometimes it's just the guns, and that's scary to put that in the hands of the government.
Yeah, I thought about that when he said it, because make these New Year's resolutions, and remember one time I got some jogging shoes and I put them on the front porch and the damn things just wouldn't jog.
I love Dr. Phil. I'm going to see if I can get another clip, because that was really good.
He's become quite based now, hasn't he?
He is.
He's obviously split away from Oprah. Yeah, that's what I need to do. I'll say to my personal trainer, look, I've got the exercise bike at home, but it just won't cycle for me. That's why I've still got this big belly of mine. Look, this stuff with guns in America, Switzerland has a higher per capita gun ownership rate. And actually, I went to this beautiful restaurant when I was over there, and next door to the restaurant was a gun store. It was closed, and the guns were actually in the window, and they had these big knives, and I was just astounded sitting there taking photos, And the restaurant guys were like, what are you so fascinated with this for? They're everywhere. I'm like, well, I'm just not used to seeing it. So there are many places that have similar or higher gun ownership per capita rates in the United States. I actually really do feel for them. I wish that we still had guns here. I wish that John Howard didn't take away our gun rights after Port Arthur. However, I have to say it's nice to not have to think about, you're going to send your child to school and there's going to be, your child might come home dead. I mean, that must be terribly scary. And if you have a look at the top stories here, we had the stabbing at the Bondi, Westfield Bondi. Yeah. Things like that hit the news. Even in the UK, those 3 little girls that were dancing to Taylor Swift or whatever, who were stabbed and lost their lives. But it's not a gun shooting where 30 of them died. Yeah. It was 3. Not the 3 is okay, but we're not dealing with the same sort of stuff that they're dealing with in the United States. And that must be terribly tough. But one of the things that they keep saying is, well, want to have red flag laws. We want to have these common sense rules. But the common sense rules that they're proposing is that if somebody has a mental health issue or is depressed, that their guns can be taken away. Well, what if my parent or my sister or my, has passed away? What if my, wife has left me and I'm a bit depressed? Then, what's going to happen is those people aren't going to seek help in the first place because they think that their guns might be taken away from them. Yeah. So you're criminalising something. Yeah. The other thing that you're doing is in this bill, as I understand it, is you're allowing other people to report it and say, well, look, I think that, John Smith over there has an issue. Now, you're supposed to have due process before your right's taken away from you in the United States. Under these common sense gun rules, there's not going to be due process. Red flag, we're going to take your guns away from you. That doesn't make any sense. I'm just talking about things that don't make sense. I want to bring this up because there's a lot of misunderstanding, I think, about the bipartisan bill to deal with the border. The Democrats keep trying to play this, that Donald Trump said, don't pass it because I want to run on it. That's not quite what's actually happened. What that bill would have done is it would have actually cemented into law the exact problem that is being complained about. It had a cap on the numbers, but it was a discretionary cap, the 5,000 a day, which I would argue is still too high. But it was actually a discretionary cap. They don't have to shut the border. It just gives them the ability to shut the border. But I also want to make the point that it actually wasn't that bipartisan, because when it actually went through, there were Democrats who joined, a large number of Democrats that joined Republicans to defeat the bill, and most notably, Bernie Sanders opposed it. Elizabeth Warren opposed it. Now, I know that politicians will say some crazy things, but have Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren all of a sudden joined the right?
No. I think it was Bernie and Kamala. I mean, Bernie's one of the most progressive voters in the Senate, so...
Exactly.
No, highly unusual. But this
is why it was opposed. This is why it was opposed.
Right.
And that's the thing that I'll keep coming back to. Democrats, and to a lesser degree, a Labor Party here and the Labor Party in the UK. But the Democrats, they cannot take any kind of criticism. And because they're not prepared to do that, there's no self-reflection. There's no course correction. There's no kind of, okay, maybe we're doing something that we shouldn't be doing, that people don't like. The Labor Party here with the voice referendum, it was defeated, so what do the state Labor parties do? They say, okay, well, let's just introduce it at a state level. Everybody has told you they don't want it.
The most direct form of democracy in this country is a referendum, and they took it as a suggestion.
Yeah.
And it was overwhelming. It wasn't even like, Brexit, where it was 51.4%.
Yeah.
They voted to leave the European Union. It was 60.
And in relation to the misinformation bill and similar kinds of bills that have been proposed in, our Western allies, the UK, the United States, Canada, the overwhelming majority of people, I mean, you're talking about 80, 85, 90% of people are actually opposing this. So they're not going to have a referendum. They'll just try and do it legislatively. Why?
Yep.
Why not course correct and say, okay, we're just going to have to deal with this differently?
Yeah.
Because we don't have the support of the people, and all you're going to end up with is people resenting you.
It's astonishing. I mean, I don't think people understand how brilliant the left are at this. A referendum in this country, if we wanted to vote to change the country, to cede from the UK, to leave the Queen that even set up this country and leave the crown, we could have done that with that vote. 60% would have done that. And so the idea that they just brushed it off and we're like, no worries, that's a great suggestion, but we're going to keep going anyway. It's just, we have not gotten enough mileage out of that fact. And that falls at the feet of all people on the right that have any kind of political power.
Well, republicanism allegedly is a left issue, but I'll tell you, I'm a Republican to my core. I don't think Australia's ready to become a republic yet because of our legal framework. I think that there's certain things that we need to fix up.
I agree.
The least of which is that we need to make sure that individual people have the ability to restrain government. And they don't have it right now.
The reason I bring that up at all is just to show people, hey, what is a country? Our country was brought into being by the Crown. Now that power to change that, rescind that, become our own sovereign country, it's through a referendum. The idea that something that high that can remake a whole country, we did that exact vote with the voice and they said, yeah, that's a great suggestion. It's like, it doesn't get more fundamental than that. I mean, we have elections all the time, but that is like country founding stuff. And they were like, nah.
Yeah,
no. We could have burned the Constitution with a referendum, a vote like that.
I believe that the reason they don't want to bar it is because they know that under that sort of a plan, the people would demand that the power vests with the people, and the ultimate sovereignty of this country belongs to the people and not to the government. And I think that's what they don't like. I'd like to bring up a couple of issues here. At the beginning of the debate, they mentioned the Middle East, they mentioned Hurricane Helene, they mentioned climate change, and they mentioned the labour strike that's affecting the ports. They did touch on the Middle East, they did touch on climate change. I don't think they said an awful lot about Hurricane Helene.
No.
which is a pretty significant issue. It's affected North Carolina and Georgia especially. And they haven't really touched on the labour strike. I think that's going to be a pretty big issue. And that labour strike on the ports, that's not just New York. That's affecting all of the ports across the East Coast of the United States. 45,000 workers are striking. That's going to be a problem. And if they can't resolve that, if that goes on for 2 or 3 weeks, that's going to have an effect on the election. And I'm very surprised that the moderators didn't come back to that point, because it's a concern. The other issue that they've got is that Democrats are generally in support of the unions. So I don't believe that Biden's going to break the strike, although he'll be under some political pressure to do that. But if he doesn't break the strike, well, he's going to lose-lose. If he does break the strike, he's going to further alienate the unions. And if he doesn't break it, then he's going to have a mass of voters that are looking at prices going up, looking at the lack of supplies, and all that sort of stuff. I think that's a very difficult position. What's your take on that?
Yeah, the immediate thought is, were there any swing states that affects?
Well, North Carolina and Georgia, obviously.
And so the idea they wouldn't spend more time is kind of shocking, to be honest.
So there's direct issues for North Carolina and Georgia, but in New York as well. A lot of goods come into New York that go into Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. Exported goods go out of New York ports. This is going to affect the whole East Coast. That's a really significant problem. And also, it's quite difficult to bring stuff in from the West Coast. You can't ship something from California to South Dakota as easily as you can from New York, because obviously there's so much land and there's the Sierras and the mountains and all that sort of stuff to go through. That's going to massively increase costs and increase the cost of living. I think that's going to be a real problem. Interestingly, to see that Donald Trump started to come closer in the betting odds to Kamala Harris earlier today before the debate. During the debate, it's razor thin, and he's a couple of times on some of the betting sites and the aggregate sites where you can actually watch where the money's coming in. It's actually taking the lead and then drops back, and then taking the lead and drop back, but it's razor thin.
Right.
So that they're basically both at 50-50 chances. I'll maintain what I've said before. I don't believe that Kamala Harris has actually had the 18% surge in approval since she was coronated, because she hasn't done any interviews of any substance. She waited a long time before she gave an interview. She hasn't had news conferences. She hasn't explained her policies. Tim Walz had a crack today at it. I don't think that has enlightened very many people, and I just simply am not buying it that she's gone from being the most unpopular VP in recent modern American history to being this beloved superstar. I don't get it. That's like me saying, look, today I'm an overweight, balding older guy, and 1 month from now I'm a sex symbol. Now, it could happen.
Yeah, it could happen, actually.
Could happen.
Those things are highly subjective, whereas when we're talking about competence, you don't just, add 100 IQ points overnight and all of a sudden, you're like, you know what, now I've woken up on a better side of the bed. I'm going to be the best president ever, even though I've been VP for 4 years. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And the people are smart. Their lived experience of them getting less for their money for their taxes, it's not crap. Did you have any other of the topics they went through?
No, look, I think I've pretty much said everything that I can really say. I guess the only last couple of things, Tim Walz mentioned in relation to parental leave and in relation to healthcare that big companies can afford it, smaller companies can't. I actually agree with him on that. I think that's absolutely a correct point. The problem I think that he has is that it's his side that's exacerbating that problem. Donald Trump introduced things like there was a program he introduced that allowed small businesses to combine as a group to negotiate healthcare costs. Parental leave, neither side has really dealt with that. I've said before that I think the United States and Australia, for that matter, should allow a certain amount of money for employers to put into a central fund so that employees could could go from job to job without losing things like their parental leave, their sick pay entitlements, their long service entitlements, things like that. That hasn't really been addressed by any Western countries so far that I've seen, but I think that would be positive. But my main takeaway was, I think they were very polite. I think Tim Walz is more likeable than I had given him credit for.
Yeah.
I mean, over the weekend we saw some footage of him allegedly, what appeared to be him flipping the bird at people, at college kids at the stadium.
Yep.
I think he was very, very polite. He gave some compliments. I think that JD Vance did a very good job. Yep. I say that JD Vance definitely won this debate. I don't think it's going to have a huge effect on the election, but I still would maintain that I think that Trump's going to win. And I'll go out on a limb. I keep saying that I think Virginia's going to flip. I'm sure that I'll probably be embarrassed on election day when it doesn't. There's not really the numbers to support that prediction, but I think Virginia's going to flip. I think New Hampshire's going to flip, and I just get the feeling that this is going to be a blowout election, and that Kamala Harris will struggle to get more than 200.
I'm not feeling the warm and fuzzies in terms of the confidence I'd have in the past calling elections. Normally, I'm very confident on this stuff.
Well, for the record, 6 of my last 6 predictions were wrong, so don't put any credit on me. Eventually, I've got to get one right.
Yeah.
Broken watch is at least right twice a day, so eventually I'll get one right. But that's my prediction, and I don't know. Maybe I've turned into a biased right winger without realising it, but
maybe
that's what I'm thinking. I see you laughing, so you want to show us something?
I was ready to close off the show and made some final comments, and then this comes up. Because, they can't help themselves. MSNBC accuses JD Vance of mansplaining in debate.
Well, who was he mansplaining to? Okay, the 2 moderators.
Here we go.
Like muting powers. Yeah. And I actually think if you're a woman, that might be the worst moment JD Vance had, because he was going to mansplain right over that mute button. He was, and again, I don't pretend to know how everyone will react to this. I think that a lot of women in positions of authority that should command respect just by virtue of that dynamic will see themselves in some dude that disrespected them and talked over. I mean, there was a moment like that with then vice presidential in the Harris-Pence debate where she's like muting powers.
Shut up.
You've got to be absolutely kidding me.
You've got to be the muting power of her is like, and the fact that he kept talking because he wanted to disprove something that was said.
You remember when Katie Gallagher said this at I think it was some sort of Senate inquiry or whatever, and she accused somebody of mansplaining, and he said, well, what does that mean? If I said someone was womansplaining, it wouldn't go over too well.
Yeah.
Just on that, were those women in a position of authority? They were moderators. The rules of the debate were that they weren't going to fact check. She, and there was a number of times when they sort of, had a few little snide little things that they put into their questions or to their responses. Yeah. But specifically it was that the Haitians have been admitted legally. Yes, they're legal, and he was trying to explain, but that's only because of this process. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Stop putting commentary on.
Sorry, mate.
It's ridiculous.
I'm sorry for being so rude. I'm just the internet.
No, I love it. I love it.
So you know how you said, it's as long as I don't see the Trump Vance campaign post this. So Trump just posted it. I'm like, all right.
Look, he could post it. Don't run it as a campaign ad, though.
Okay. Well, let's see. Let's see.
Kamala Harris, in fairness, So when he went to that game, the Georgia-Alabama game, and the stadium erupted for him. I haven't actually seen this footage, but people have told me that she flew a plane over with a banner, saying that he should debate and he's chicken for not debating. And I was asked, well, what do you think about that? I said, I think that's actually fair play. To be honest with you, she should. She should try and get under his skin.
Yeah.
But I've seen recently that there's billboard ads of Donald Trump with like a chicken, and the head is Donald Trump saying he's too chicken to debate again. So maybe she'll goad him into it. Yeah. But no, fair call. If Donald Trump wants to put it up as his post, fair enough. I don't think it should be a campaign ad because it's not going to fly. Everyone knows that he...
It's not as worse as what the Democrats did yesterday. Did you guys see Donald Trump's nude statue on the border?
Oh, so that nude statue in Vegas, what the hell is that? What's that about? Can you imagine if they did that with Joe Biden?
Yeah.
That dude, what's his name, Colbert that took over from David Letterman, I think it's him, and if I'm incorrectly attributing to him, fair enough, but He did this thing about Donald Trump in the White House, and Donald Trump could be naked inside the White House and this that. Can you imagine the uproar if somebody did that in relation to Joe Biden?
Yeah.
It's one rule for them, it's a different rule for the rest of us, and then they wonder why people who are moderate go, "Yeah, I'm not going with you guys."
Got another one. So just to confirm, that wasn't a fart. That was somebody laughing.
Yeah, sorry guys. I laugh weirdly. So this is breaking newly resurfaced photo of Tim Walz hanging out with his friend, and it's a school shooting person. Terrible taste, but hilarious.
The left are going to lose their mind. The left are going to, maybe I'll take it back. Maybe it is an effective strategy because the left are going to get so upset about it, they're all going to start crying and whinging about it. Are there any memes about JD Vance?
Look at the New York Times. Vance dominant debate performance. Vance's dominate debate performance shows why he's Trump's running mate. I didn't feel like he was a dominant.
I do.
It's a bit of a mouthful. Vance's dominant. Yeah, sorry, I'm
Vance's
tripping.
Dominant debate performance shows why he's Trump's running mate.
Yeah.
I think it was dominant. Yeah, absolutely. I think he had great answers. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get particularly emotional. He was patient. He smiled. He looked at the camera.
Did you guys notice towards the end, JD Vance and his wife went to shake hands, but then after they shook hands with Tampon Tim and his wife, Tampon Tim and his wife walked out of the studio. We are about to walk out, where JD Vance and his wife went to shake hands with the moderators.
I noticed.
And then when the other couple noticed that, they went and did the same thing.
Oh, right.
I noticed that. I was waiting for Tim Walz to give JD Vance a hug. Because if you notice, he kept sort of touching him in the arm and stuff, which is fine. That's a way of being personable, I guess. But he sort of did it a little bit too much, I thought. But I'm not going to make a big deal out of that. But no, I thought he was absolutely dominant. He had great answers, and Tim Walz, he had that sort of frown. That, he looked like he was going to cry some of the time. Like he looked uncomfortable. He looked unhappy. He just looked. But do we have any memes on Vance? Because as I said, I think he did a great job.
Here's one.
We could come together and solve this if Senator Langford did it. We could come together and solve this if Senator Langford did it.
It's just...
We could come together and solve this if we...
It's kind of like a template. You could really do some stuff with this. Yeah, so anyway.
I know I'm preaching to the choir, but, could anybody vote for this lot, really? Like, the fact of the matter is that even if there's the blowout electoral victory that I'm saying that there will be, there is still going to be a very big percentage. There's going to be tens of millions of Americans that are going to vote for Harris and Walz.
Yeah, 70, 80 million.
Well, it won't be as high as that, I don't think.
What was it last time?
Yeah, but last time...
70 million each.
Popular vote for sure.
But last time last time was different because of COVID. I mean, we've never seen that sort of turnout. When Biden says that he's the most popular president in history because he had more votes, to be fair, that would mean that Trump is the most popular presidential candidate that didn't win in history as well, because he had more votes than anybody else.
That's what he said. That's what Trump says.
Yeah.
But no, look, mail-in voting, it's still there. The population's gone up due to mass immigration. There's going to be probably fake ballots. I mean, I think both will be higher.
You guys heard about Newsom's thingy?
The illegal immigration thing?
Check for ID. You can't ask for it anymore. So.
Yeah, I think that's ridiculous. I think the Supreme Court's going to have to do something about that. I'm actually surprised here that we don't have a check for ID. I think that there's support for that. This idea that people don't have ID, ridiculousness is that.
It's ridiculous.
Right? But
it's ridiculous.
Look, I think with the mail-in voting, yes, it is subject to fraud. There's a lot of concerns that people have, and Democrats themselves say this. Kamala Harris was saying this herself prior to this election, prior to that election. So, Democrats are kicking themselves, so they're going to try and claim that, this is a problem, and then when they win, I don't know, how dare you question it? That's absurd. But on the numbers, you've actually seen an increase, a surge, actually, in mail-in ballots being requested by Republicans, and you've seen a massive decrease. And most importantly, you've seen that happen in those swing states like Georgia, like Pennsylvania.
That's right. So the Republicans are finally leaning into it. What they did last time was the Pope, Trump, he said it's bad, so they didn't even consider it. Whereas I was looking at that and I was like, the Democrats are working with the rules in front of them, and that they changed. If you're not going to do that, you're going to be running on soft sand where they'll be running on hard sand. You need to lean into the machine. If you want it changed, you have to get in first. If you're not in, you don't have a seat at the table. And so in New South Wales, we had a similar thing a year ago. There were a lot of people that were, because of the American culture, they were against early voting. They were like, you shouldn't vote early and this and that. It's not secure compared to America. And I said, now, hang on a sec. If you lean into early voting, there aren't 50 polling booths per electorate. There's just 2. And almost 40% of people vote before election day. And you don't have enough volunteers for election day. So why don't you really focus on pre-polling, get that percentage that you need, and concentrate your volunteers there? That way that 40% of voters before election day, even 50% of voters, you've actually really had a red-hot crack. And then on election day, when you can't man 50 polling booths, you know, you do what you can, but you put all the hard work in that 2-week polling period. In Victoria, it's 3-week early voting.
I'd always make the argument that it would actually serve the right in this country to have, to expand on early voting, because, wealthier people tend to travel more, they have businesses, things like that. They're very likely to be away, and the older generation, which tends to skew very heavily to the right, may not find it as easy to get down to the voting booth. The other thing to remember about the United States is that their election's on the first Tuesday of November, whereas ours is on a weekend. Theirs is on a Tuesday, so it becomes, not only does it become awkward for a lot of people to vote, but additionally, you have the issue that, especially in the northeast or the Midwest of the country, you can have terrible weather.
Yeah.
Who wants to go through a blizzard to vote?
Exactly.
So early voting or mail-in voting can be quite helpful.
There's some obvious problems. I mean, because it's on a weekend for us, we shouldn't have to call for a public holiday, but we should for people that are working anyway on the Saturdays. In America, it should 100% be a public holiday. Even Bernie Sanders says it should be a public holiday so that everyone can get out and vote, because they don't have mandatory voting, whereas we have mandatory voting. But on top of that, we do have one of the best systems in the world. You know, when we don't check ID, but we should. But in terms of mail-in voting, it's nothing like the Americans. Not even the French do mail-in voting. They know how much fraudulent it is. But in Australia, they don't do mass mail-out voting. You have to request ahead of time, and it goes to an address. So you won't have your mail-in ballot stolen because it's an unmarked letter. It's only sent to specific people. It's not that many people yet. Everyone, votes on the day. So it's a very safe system right now, but
it'd be relatively easy to make it a registered, the equivalent over there for registered post sort of thing. You go to the post office to pick it up.
Just like gold, when you deliver gold to your house or silver, And on top of that, can I just say, Professor David Flint, emeritus professor, he's very intelligent on these particular topics, and he says an election is meant to be a snapshot in time of the electorate, not a 3-month or a 2-month or a 1-month snapshot. It's meant to be a snapshot in one day. Where is Australia at? Because a lot of people, they regret their vote when they didn't see one of the debates in 2020. They were like, I regret voting for Biden. I didn't know he was against fracking, because Trump hammered him in the second debate about fracking and exposed him on that. And people regretted their vote. And it's like, well, that's why if it ain't broke, don't change it. Why are we even changing it? Anyways, so.
Well, there were a lot of people that were polled that said that had they have known the New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop was actually correct, or if they'd even been aware of it, that would have actually changed their vote. And the polls actually indicate that the amount of people that would have changed their votes would have been enough to swing the election to Trump.
Yeah, 100%. It wasn't even close.
But I'll say to the United States, you've offshored and outsourced everything else. Maybe you should get the AEC. For all the issues that we have with the AEC, they still do a pretty good job. Maybe you should get the AEC to run the American elections, because nobody could cock it up more than they have.
Yeah, I like it. I'm all for it.
We'll hold back on the AEC raids, but leaving that bit aside, actually counting the elections, but maybe the AEC should do it.
Yeah, they are overpriced, but then again, you Americans have plenty of money to throw around. It was $500 million to do the referendum. You might remember they started off by saying it was 200 mil, and it went up to like 450 mil. But anyway, guys, thank you for listening. As I said last time, we weren't sure about how things were going to go with the debate, but I suspected as the weeks went on after the Trump-Kamala debate, Trump looked better. I think with this one, it's not even close. It's 100% going to make J.D. Vance look better as time goes on. He was on form. It wasn't perfect, but it was very, very good. I felt like he was on much more on his game than Trump was. And I hope that we will see in the next week or two or three how this potentially leads into a new debate between Trump and Kamala. Maybe the polling will go down even further. There was some leaked audio messages between the Kamala campaign freaking out about the polling in a lot of the swing states that she needs to win, especially Michigan, which is heavily Muslim. And there's a lot of Muslims that are sitting at home. They don't want to vote because she's not moving on Palestine and Israel. And both candidates seem to be just in Israel's lobby. And so they're basically saying, well, we're going to sit this one out. And Kamala needs those votes because traditionally they've gone Democrat. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
I don't see the Muslim vote going for the left anymore, to be honest with you. I mean, I've got Muslim family, and I sit there and talk to them about some of the issues, and like the stuff like the trans stuff that they're doing to the kids. Muslims are generally pretty conservative, like Catholics and most other religious people. They're like, what the hell is all this stuff? So I think that's going to change. Trump's winning, support with blacks, especially black men. He's winning support with Hispanics. He's winning support from the unions. Except for the IRS agents union. He's winning support with middle class. He's winning support with working class. He's winning support with college-educated white males. It doesn't leave much for Dems to really run on because they just don't have the ability to course correct. So I think that's going to be a very significant issue. Last question for you. It's a double question. Would you like to see a second debate between Trump and Harris? And do you think that there's going to be one?
No, I absolutely think there should be a second debate. I think the idea that Trump did better in the second debate with Biden was a game changer, and I think more information's better, not less. It's unfortunate that the voting period already started at least 1 or 2 weeks ago with the Americans, but it is what it is, and I think that more information than less. I really do. I think Trump, he has phenomenal advisors, just as Kamala does, and I think that he needs another bite at this apple to really bring this home.
Do you think there will be one?
Most likely not. Most likely not. It really depends. I'm really hoping that this starts a domino effect with Vance, and that adds to the already snowball of the bad polling with Kamala. I think probably no, but I'm more than happy to be wrong. I hope there's another one. It's great content, and I always love getting you in, and maybe next time we'll have a wine.
You get to see my pretty face again. Look, I agree with your sentence there. I'd like to see one. It is worth noting that she did turn down the debate at Fox and I think somewhere else, and so she's only wanting to have it with CNN. If memory serves me correctly, someone can fact check that.
Right.
I would like to see one, and I think that he can maybe come out and be a little bit more articulate in his views. And she would then need to talk a bit more about policy. Because at the moment, I think that J.D. Vance has articulated the position that he has much better than he has. And I think that Tim Walz has articulated the positions that she claims to have much better than she has. So I would love to hear from them again. Will it happen? I mean, they're talking about the 23rd of October. Will it happen? I don't know. I'm doubtful, but I'd love to see it. And maybe she'll goad him into it by calling him a chicken.
Yeah.
Have we got another meme before we go?
Actually, just a video. We were talking about Michigan. This is an imam, I do believe, who is in Michigan.
And they've thrown their support behind him, haven't they, recently?
Well, actually, not this one. He's actually quite a prominent Muslim imam engaged in the political process. And he was making some interesting points about Israel-Palestine and Kamala Harris. Is he going to vote for them? He's in Michigan, and he is quite a high-profile Muslim leader in America. In fact, he did meet a number of popes, actually. But this is the intro. By the way, great podcast, this particular podcast, the way they've set it up. But I'll let you guys be the judge of that. Check this out.
They think we're against America. We're not against it. I love America. Muslims have more freedom in this country than any Muslim country. I'm the first to admit. Why most Muslims hate America? Many Muslims, not in this country, around the world. Why? For one reason. For its blind support of Israel. The Romans kicked the Jews, not the Arabs. Not me. This is my land.
The Jewish people do have a history in that land. Very much a history in that land. Jerusalem's their holiest city.
I participated in most presidential elections since I became a citizen in 1998. But in this one, most likely I'm going to stay home.
They're socially conservative here, right? And yet Rashida Tlaib is very, very progressive.
I had a discussion with her personally. I told her I support your political stand, but your social stand, I don't support, including when she supports the gays and lesbians.
On the point of Israeli control over American politics, it's not like the Sunni countries don't have money.
Do you think that if America abandoned Israel, there would be a Holocaust of Israel?
I don't know if there will be Holocaust of Israel.
Okay, so today we have a completely unique episode.
I'm looking forward to listening to that because we need more content like this, going back and forth on the different issues. But interestingly enough, he made the point, no, I'm going to be sitting home. I agree with her political stance on Israel-Palestine, but I disagree with her LGBT stance. So they're in a bit of a quagmire, and it's enough that he's not going to turn out. And a lot of Muslims listen to that, and they're like, maybe we won't come out in Michigan, which she needs to win.
That's very interesting, and I'd love to see what effect that's going to have on the Australian election that's coming up. Who knows when? Some talk about happening in December. Look, I just want to make this quick comment about Israel-Palestine. I'm no expert in this area, but it appears that the Western world is still saying that it should be a two-state solution. The Palestinians, rightly or wrongly, I don't know. The Palestinians are saying, no, we don't want a two-state solution. And I've sat down and actually discussed with some of the protesters and some of the advocates of Palestine and said, look, when you say things like from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free, are you advocating for the mass extermination of Jewish people? Because that's not going to fly. Like, is that what you're actually asking for? And what they've come back to me and said is, no, we're not asking for that. What we are saying is that is our land as well, and that you don't get to take the best land, give us this, and then say it was a compromise. Now, again, because I'm not an expert in this area, I don't know. And, you listen to media, you listen to different political pundits, you listen to different experts. I've got no idea what should happen there. But it would seem to me, I've said this before, it would seem to me that this issue is never going to be resolved between Israel and Palestine entering into an agreement together. It'll only ever be resolved between the West and the Middle East, because they're the powers that are funding both of the sides. And if the Palestinians are saying we should be one country, if that's their position, I'm not saying that is the position, but that's the impression that I get, is that they're saying that we should be one country and we shouldn't be second-class citizens in that country. Maybe we need to actually look at something like that. Because I'm 40, in my entire life, all I've ever heard is that our country supported a two-state solution. We haven't been able to get anywhere with that. There's increasing conflict there. This can't go on forever. We can't allow innocent people to be, being killed in Israel and in Palestine, children losing their lives, families being ripped apart. Something needs to be done. Yeah. And I don't know what the solution is, but I think there needs to be more conversations about alternative options other than the two-state solution, because it's just not getting anywhere. The other thing is that we're now seeing this massive increase in conflict in the Middle East. The bombings that you just said in Lebanon. You're seeing the rise of Iran. People are saying it's going to be a world war. I don't necessarily think it's going to be a world war, because I think the West is reasonably unified. But, it's such a problem. It's just such a big issue. And we need to be able to have sensible conversations where we take some of the venom out of the conversation and say, look, what is going to be the best solution that gives the most amount of people the most amount of freedom and liberty and saves the most amount of people's lives? We need to try to come to a more harmonious and peaceful time. And it breaks my heart to see that we are entering into a time where it's more conflicted than it has been in the past around the world.
It's a complete crap show. I need to do a dedicated panel on this as well. It's tough, you know. We in English, it's obviously my main language. I don't speak much Arabic, especially not the different dialects, because there's Arabic Egyptian, there's Arabic Lebanese, there's high Arabic and low Arabic and informal, and it's just it's a difficult language, and you need that in the news area to understand. Like when Albanese was asked about negative gearing on Sky News, you and I could both tell, even when it was muted, he was lying.
Yeah, of course.
You know, and that's the skill I don't yet have with Arabic and the news. And to make matters,
how to lie in Arabic.
How to lie, no, you can kind of tell. You know, go right then left, then right again. Russell Peters' segment.
That was a very interesting thing there that the Imam said, that I love America, and the Muslims from outside of America, the issue that they have is the support for Israel. Otherwise, they like America. And it's very interesting because I've spent time in the Middle East, and I've actually brought up some of these issues. And I know a couple of people there that are Iranian. And I said, tell me, like, what's the story here? And basically the answer was, look, we've got conflicts here. We've had conflicts forever. Why does America want to jump in and tell us who's right and wrong?
Yeah.
And I sort of went, I guess that makes sense. So, I can kind of see where you're coming from.
Yeah, honestly, you could argue both sides. I mean, I'm not an expert in geopolitics. Heck, I was 21 when I started all this stuff. I barely know, where I'm going career-wise, let alone. But no, looking at all of this, you need people from both sides. The established order in Australia, like the Peter Duddens and the John Andersons, former Deputy Prime Minister, that John Howard, Tony Abbott's, they would say, well, there's a global economic order, Joel. And in order to uphold that, you need a police of the world, because they're the father of the house, they're the leader, they have to set the tone and calm down the totalitarian states. But then these countries, and sovereign countries as well, that all that crap about, we've got to keep Ukraine's back because Russia's invading a sovereign country, that's literally what Israel's doing to Lebanon right now, and potentially Syria soon, and other countries, Egypt in the past. And all of that stuff has gone out the window. They've completely just... It's like rules for thee but not for me. And they're sovereign countries. I mean, Palestine has slowly shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, and Israel's grown and grown and grown. And the big fear, especially with some of these surrounding sovereign countries with constitutions, is that they are going to be a part of this greater Israel. They are going to be engulfed, just as Palestine is, in this greater Israel thing, which... By the way, if you haven't seen a map of Greater Israel, I strongly recommend it. It engulfs all of Lebanon. It engulfs most of Syria. It engulfs Saudi Arabia, a large portion of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and I think the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. And so this is a genuine worry about this topic. And for people that have been to the Middle East, like myself in Lebanon, which I'm more comfortable speaking on, my heritage and having been there and met the people, Hezbollah is a group that I think Peter Dutton is being a little bit broad-brushed on. The amount of... It doesn't matter how you cut it. If you're Christian, no matter the denomination in Lebanon, if you're any form of Muslim, like Shia, Sunni, there are some that like Hezbollah, and there are some that don't like Hezbollah. Many of them see Hezbollah as a freedom-fighting group that's fighting against Israel and protecting Lebanon's sovereignty and constitution and way of life. Whereas some are saying, no, Hezbollah are the terrorists, they're the ones stoking all the fear and killings and everything. Now, if you're going to ask me, Joel, what do you think? I have no idea. I was born in Australia 27 years ago. I don't speak the language, I can't meander through this. But one thing I really freaking hate is I did go there with my family. I did go there and see the stories with my uncles who spoke the language, and my dad, and many people, they spoke positively about Hezbollah as saviors, and some didn't. And the history is being demolished. Baalbek, where I went to, Baalbek is being bombed, and one of the oldest temples, the Temple of Jupiter, built by the Romans, that could potentially have been hit. We don't even know yet. There are bigger columns there than the ones you can find often in places like Rome. Like the Acropolis is tiny compared to some of this stuff I saw in Baalbek. And just like Syria during, the 2014 wars with ISIS, where they deliberately went after all these historical sites of our history, thousands of years, over 3,000 years of history, it's all being destroyed and blown up, and the people are dying in all these countries, and it just feels like there's no end to it. And the worst part is, there's so many Lebanese in Australia, especially in Sydney. There's about 250,000 of us here in Sydney, born here. Many of them, they holiday every single year in Lebanon, which used to be the Paris of the Middle East. You know how all the flights go via Dubai nowadays? It used to be Paris. Paris is, it used to be Paris. It used to be Beirut in Lebanon. And they speak Arabic, French, and English, because it was the French that established the constitution there in conjunction with the English. And when you look at that country and how it's changed, and how it's collapsed ever since, Israel was established, and it's slowly declined, it's heartbreaking to a lot of people that holiday there, and we still have family there. And if you're going to just tell us, stop talking about it, Australia first, that's all you need to focus on, that's like saying when England and London is being bombed, just forget about it. It's Australia first, forget about it. You don't. But you're getting calls from people saying, I have family there, they're dying, they're this, they're that. They're not hiding missiles in their house. It's not easy, and I really don't know how that translates in an Australian context. And it's not clear-cut. Anyone that's telling you it's clear-cut is lying to you. I don't...
I can't... I really can't weigh in on it because I just don't know enough about it. But, look, clearly the British sort of establishing Israel and bringing Jewish people over there, and then the travesty that happened to them in the Holocaust and in World War II. I think that's an issue that we need to actually deal with. It's been long enough now. It's been, World War II ended in the 40s, so it's been 80 years. And I think that there is still some overhang that needs to be addressed. And look, I think you're right that there's people that, well-meaning, good-hearted people that feel quite passionately about things. I think that the Jewish people are in a difficult position as well. What are they supposed to do at this point?
Yeah.
But look, I don't think it's helpful when, one of the most heartbreaking things I ever saw out the front of Sydney Opera House, one of the most iconic buildings in the world, and the protesters were saying, F the Jews, kill the Jews, gas the Jews, right here in Sydney.
Shouldn't be happening.
That shouldn't be happening.
No, not at all. And the police saying we can't shut it down.
Well,
I was like, that's great.
I'm not necessarily sure that you want to arrest them and put them in jail.
No, you shouldn't.
But I don't think that helps to advocate whatever position you're trying to take. Having said that, obviously passions are inflamed, and I think we need to be sensible, and we need to talk about what is the proposal. How are we going to deal with the Jewish people? How are we going to deal with the Muslims in this area? And other Middle Easterns, not every Middle Eastern is a Muslim. There are Christians, there's other religions there. It certainly needs to be addressed, but we need to be moving towards a more peaceful outcome, but not peace at the expense that a group of people are going to be oppressed and have their rights and freedoms taken away from them, which is what I think the Palestinians and their supporters are talking about. So, again, look, I really can't weigh in on it any more than that.
Look, and again,
say we want world peace, but there's not really much else.
From everything I've said, they're just statements of facts, and they're not actually my opinion. Like, these are just the situation I see in front of me. I can see things, and a lot of my police contacts are contacting me about, what do you think's going to happen here and there and whatever. And I'm just like, man, we are in for a really rough October. I really do feel that way. I mean, this is not cooling down in the Middle East, and it's not good. I don't have a firm opinion on any of this. I really don't. I just don't want to see sovereign countries invaded. I don't want to see good people die. I think Trump put it best and simply. I just want people to stop dying.
Yeah, and I think that Trump's probably the best person out of him and Kamala Harris to actually address this issue. Now, the question's going to be, is his cabinet going to be the best to deal with it? I don't know. But I don't think that this would have happened if he was the president.
No, definitely.
I don't think that there would have been this increase in conflict. And I do think that even if you don't agree with him on some of his other stances, I think that he is probably more likely to bring about a more peaceful world for everybody. And I think that's why there's more people around the world that are watching these debates, that are talking about American politics than ever before, because it does affect all of us. Not just those of us who live in conflicted areas, but it also, brings some guidance, I think, to our countries. Things like the misinformation bill and all these sorts of things that we're talking about. If America takes a very staunch stance against that sort of stuff, maybe our governments will start to back off of those things.
I think so. Yeah.
But certainly, from a perspective of world peace, I don't think we're ever going to, unfortunately, have complete world peace. But I think that Trump will make the world more peaceful than what Kamala Harris is going to be able to do.
Totally agree. I totally agree. Well, let's see how the next 30 days go and if there is another debate. But as always, I appreciate you coming on board for the show. I'm looking forward to putting this out to everyone and making sure you guys get an insight as to how it develops with regards to the polling, how it changes. But I will be back most likely next week for the next show on all the news that's going on and how things develop as we get closer to the November 5th Australia time election of the US. But we do have a lot of other projects coming out. I'll keep you updated on the misinformation bill and the Queensland election, the ACT election, and the Victorian local election. But without further ado, guys, I'll see you later. Shoot us a few bucks to help the show. And thank you for joining us. I'll see you later.